Behold a Ukrainian Trojan pig. Cue the sound of Trump and Putin laughing. There was a recent leak from the so-called Ukraine peace plan. It would seem to indicate that a key part of it is the Ukraine's acceptance into the European Union, and not just on some vague future date, but precisely on January 1st, 2027. If you think deeply about this, and I very much encourage you to do so, you too will laugh loudly, unless you live in the EU, in which case you will weep inconsolably. Désolé, mais c'est la vie. A quick note on why I do these videos. I do these videos to draw attention to my blog, on which I chronicle the ongoing collapse of the Western world in articles and books. I like to do research and I like to write. I don't like to do videos. If these videos do not get me more subscribers on my blog, then I will conclude that they don't work and will stop doing them. So please go to my blog, which is at boosty.to/cluborlove, and subscribe. You can log in using your Google account and choose a subscription level of your choice. It takes a tiny bit of money. That is a requirement because people don't take seriously things that they don't pay for, and I wish to be taken seriously. So please go and subscribe. Thank you. 2 whole generations of Ukrainians have had their brain pans polished to a high gloss by Western propaganda. This has been happening since the mid-1980s at least. As a result, when the time came, they went and jumped up and down on Independence Square in Kiev. These jumpers were demanding espresso, lacy underwear, and iPhones. They thought that integration with the EU would give them these nice things. They did not want any of that nasty Eurasian customs union, all that coal, cold-rolled steel, cement, wheat, and enriched uranium, all that nasty post-Soviet stuff they've been carefully conditioned to despise. By now, most thinking people have started to suspect something. Thinking people are a minority, unfortunately. And so these few people have come to suspect something. They have come to suspect that all this careful conditioning was for a specific purpose, and that it had nothing to do with their wishes for a stylish, high-tech European nirvana. It was the globalists who stood behind this propagandistic onslaught, and what they wanted was to weaponize the poor Ukrainian fools. They wanted a docile herd of cannon fodder to throw at Russia. The globalists are, unfortunately, a bunch of inbred idiots, and in their idiocy, they thought that they could destroy Russia, and then they could get at its natural resources without having to pay for them. They were dead wrong. Unfortunately, it is the Ukrainians who ended up dead. 1.5 million of them so far. But now a large population of Ukrainians has been infected with liberalism of the cerebral cortex. This is a condition that is very difficult to treat. These Ukrainians want to enter the European Union. They want their espresso, their lacy underwear, and their iPhone. The Europeans owe them, you see. Meanwhile, the Europeans have already had their fill of Ukrainians. They would very much like to get rid of them all. Too bad. They will all end up living on the same reservation, along with mobs of migrants from other shithole countries. Shithole countries is Trump speak, by the way. And so the Ukraine is being forced into the EU, and Trump and Putin are laughing. Trump and Putin are laughing for different reasons. Trump wants to dismantle the European Union. It was originally an American plan. It was put together through the efforts of American federal agents. But now it has turned into a nest of Trump's globalist enemies. Trump's enemies now sit there seething. They hope that he dies or gets killed or impeached as soon as possible. And Trump wants to wreck the EU along with his domestic globalist enemies. Forcibly stuffing the Ukraine into the EU is a good way of wrecking it. Even if it had been forced to absorb the Ukraine as it was in 2019, the EU would have choked to death on it. But think how the Ukraine will be at the conclusion of Russia's special military operation. It will make a truly hideous present, an embittered, resentful, hateful population. It will finally realize what a dirty trick has been played on it. The trick was to get them to fight Russia. This is automatically an act of supreme idiocy. Russia always wins when attacked. It was the American neocons who came up with this stupid plan, but it will be the Europeans who will pay for it. Attack Russia, you might inquire incredulously. Wasn't it Russia that invaded poor little helpless Ukraine? To prevent you from losing touch with reality, let's take a quick walk down memory lane. What follows is dense but factual. The Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Partnership between Ukraine and Russia was signed on May 31st, 1997 in Kiev by Presidents Boris Yeltsin and Leonid Kuchma. It established a strategic partnership between the two newly hatched nations of the Ukraine and the Russian Federation. It established the somewhat arbitrary internal line of demarcation between the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and the Russian Federated Soviet Socialist Republic as the newly established international border between them. The border was bogus. It cut in half towns, fields, and houses. The treaty came into effect in 1999. Border posts were set up, but Russia and the Ukraine were part of the same free trade zone, and so the border wasn't too much of an inconvenience. But then in 2014, the Ukraine's constitutional government was overthrown. It was Americans who orchestrated the coup. They replaced the constitutional elected government with an unconstitutional regime. This immediately complicated state legal relations with Russia. Later, in 2019, the new unconstitutional Ukrainian regime refused to renew the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Partnership. At that point, from the point of view of international law, the border between Russia and the Ukraine ceased to exist. It was no longer defined by any valid international agreement. When the Ukrainian army attacked Russians on what it thought was its own territory, it attacked Russia. Oops. This is the first inconvenient but nevertheless significant fact to take on board. From the point of view of international law, there is no border between the Ukraine and Russia. International law is a bitch, but the alternative is war. Under international law, Russia is the legal successor to the late Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Russia also inherited its huge international debts, which it has paid off by now. Russia inherited its assets, its nuclear weapons, and its territory, except for those pieces of territory which it voluntarily surrendered by treaty. When, in 2019, the Kiev regime did not renew the treaty, the Ukraine's border with Russia became null and void. There is another inconvenient but significant fact to take on board. The old line of demarcation between the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and the Russian Federated Soviet Socialist Republic was a travesty. It had been hastily drawn up by Vladimir Lenin. It lumped into the Ukraine a number of Russian provinces. The Ukraine was underdeveloped and largely agrarian. The Russian provinces were industrialized and highly developed. Lenin hoped that together they would form a sort of ethnic Ukrainian unity, that it could develop together along communist lines, Ukrainian peasants and Russian workers doing that class struggle thing together. The plan wasn't altogether stupid. The Ukrainian SSR did prosper for quite a while until the USSR collapsed. It didn't prosper much after that. In any case, these Russian provinces are once again a part of Russia. In a strictly legal sense, They were not lost, but temporarily misplaced. Some of this land is still occupied by the Ukrainian army, and that is just too bad for the Ukrainian army. Back to the present day, the Ukraine is largely destroyed. Quite a lot of its population has fled either to Russia or to the European Union. The rest is probably not going to want to stay in a destroyed, destitute country. Imagine no roads or bridges, no commerce, no electricity or running water. Oh, and let's not forget, roamed by armed gangs. The European Union will find itself with a very large additional population of Ukrainian refugees. There will be 10 million of them at the very least. They will be embittered, resentful, and full of hate. They will be fully conscious of the dirty trick that had been played on them by the combined West, and they will seek revenge. But what of those migrants from shithole countries who are already in Europe? In the fullness of time, they will come to seem like furry, cuddly little pets. The Europeans are still thinking that they can somehow weasel their way out of this situation. It was one thing to make empty promises to the Ukrainians: liberal democracy, espresso, lacy underwear, iPhones, visa-free travel, entry into NATO, the European Union, or the Milky Way Empire. Promises are for suckers, or so the Europeans probably thought. It is entirely another to absorb the remnants of a defeated nation from a destroyed land. How the Europeans manage to do that will be very interesting to watch. Theoretically, they could elect a new bunch of politicians, right-wingers. They would be adamantly opposed to all immigration. They would declare that they are now under new management and that they will not be held to any promises made by the previous management. I'm sure that Trump wouldn't mind that at all. A Europe of conservative, isolationist little countries is something he could work with. Putin would find that quite copacetic as well. Russia also prefers bilateral relations with individual European nations. It has no use at all for the political amoebas of the European Union. It would be beneath its dignity to deal with NATO's toy soldiers. But that is all in the future, and here is what is in the present. The Ukraine's entry into the EU is being written into the peace plan. This is a brilliant tactical move, not to mention very funny.